My body trembled when I felt the bathroom door slowly open behind me. The hot water from the shower masked any sound of footsteps, but I knew someone had come in. The thick steam made it impossible to see clearly, but a familiar shadow was moving on the other side of the frosted glass stall. It was Adrian. My name is Derek Mason, I'm 28 years old, and I work as a logistics consultant for a national distribution company. If you've ever felt lost between doing what's right and following your heart, hit the like button. This story will make you question everything you thought you knew about yourself. 3 weeks before that moment in the bathroom, I was driving my pickup truck on the back roads of rural Paraná, running from one of the worst periods of my career. A redistribution project I was leading had failed spectacularly, almost costing me my job and definitely my reputation at the company. My boss had suggested I take a vacation to reorganize my priorities. Translation: get lost before I fire you. So I hit the road. No fixed destination, no timeline, just me and the asphalt stretching endlessly ahead. For years I had lived by unwritten rules about what was right or wrong, always trying to make choices that wouldn't hurt anyone. The result? An organized but empty life. Relationships that ended due to a lack of passion and a constant feeling that I was living someone else's life. What you're hearing here is just the beginning. The complete, unfiltered stories with all the details you can imagine are available now. Check out the link in the description right now. I had been living alone in Curitiba since I broke up with Marina 2 years ago. She was perfect on paper. A successful lawyer, stable family, goals aligned with mine. But there was no fire between us. There was no spark that makes your heart race when a person walks into the room. We ended things civilly, like two business partners dissolving a company that was no longer profitable. Now, driving along these dusty country roads, I could finally breathe. The smell of eucalyptus mixed with the damp earth aroma coming in through the half-open window. The hypnotic sound of the tires on the uneven asphalt created a perfect soundtrack for my voluntary escape from reality. For 3 weeks, I kept a simple routine that became my refuge. Waking up without an alarm, driving until I was tired, stopping at small roadside restaurants where no one knew me, and sleeping in simple inns where I could be just another anonymous traveler. Superficial conversations with strangers, polite smiles with waitresses curious about my story, silent nights planning the next leg of the journey. Solitude had become my comfort zone. I didn't have to explain my choices to anyone, didn't have to pretend I was okay when I felt lost, and had no expectations to meet other than filling the tank and finding a place to spend the night. It was a freedom I hadn't experienced in years. The countryside of Paraná surprised me with its wild beauty. Rolling hills covered in native forest, small rural properties where time seemed to have stopped in the 1980s, and red dirt roads that led to places that weren't even on the map. During the day, the sun created plays of light and shadow on the treetops, and at night, a starry sky that the city's light pollution had made me forget existed. It was in these moments of contemplation, driving slowly on a deserted road with only the sound of the engine for company, that I allowed myself to think about what I really wanted from life. The questions I had avoided for years finally found space to emerge. Who was I when I wasn't trying to impress anyone? What truly made me happy? Why did all my relationships seem to follow the same predictable script? On Friday of the 3rd week, everything changed. The road I was taking south was blocked by a highway patrol roadblock. A sweaty officer in uniform informed me that a bridge had collapsed during the night's rains, and the nearest detour would add at least 200 kilometers to the trip. "It'll take you all day to get where you're going, buddy," the cop said, fanning himself with his cap. "Better find a place to spend the night and try again tomorrow." Sitting in the driver's seat with the engine off, I checked my phone for options in the area. That's when I remembered Adrian Winters, my college friend who had moved to the countryside a few years ago. A quick search on Facebook confirmed it. He lived just 40 kilometers from there, in a small town whose name I could barely pronounce. Adrian was always different from me in college. While I worried about grades and internships, he seemed to know everyone on campus. He had that natural ability to make friends, a confidence I secretly envied. I remembered him as someone who always knew exactly what he wanted from life, even when the rest of us were lost, trying to figure out which career to pursue. I hesitated before calling. We hadn't talked in over 2 years, just occasional likes on social media and superficial comments on birthday photos. But the prospect of driving an extra 200 kilometers on roads I didn't know, just to sleep in another impersonal inn, didn't seem appealing. The phone rang 3 times before Adrian answered. "Derek Mason! Man, what a great surprise!" His voice had the same contagious energy I remembered from college. Haven't seen your Facebook updates in a while. How are you? I quickly explained my situation. The aimless trip, the blocked road, the fact that I was in the area by chance. Adrian didn't hesitate for a second. Come on over right now. I've got cold beer in the fridge and a barbecue grill that's begging to be used. It's been a while since I've had a visitor from the old days. He gave me the address and detailed instructions. His house was on a rural property 15 kilometers from town, at the end of a dirt road that wound between soybean fields and small pine groves. The drive there gave me time to think about Adrian and our college years. He studied environmental engineering while I was in business administration. Our paths crossed mainly at parties and the Thursday soccer game we organized on the university field. Adrian was one of those people who could talk to anyone, from shy freshmen to the most serious professors, from popular girls to math nerds. I remembered a specific time during our third year when my dad had a heart attack, and I needed to stay home for 2 weeks helping my mom with the medical and bureaucratic procedures. Adrian showed up at the hospital on a rainy Tuesday night, driving 4 hours from the university just to keep me company during one of the most difficult times of my life. He didn't ask for anything in return, didn't make a big deal about it. He just stayed there with me, sharing bad coffee from the vending machine and helping me pass the time with funny stories about our classmates. I never forgot that gesture, but I also never knew how to thank him properly. Adrian had this rare ability to show up exactly when you needed him most, as if he had a special sensor for detecting when someone was having a tough time. Adrian's property exceeded my expectations. The house was modern but cozy, built with wood and stone on a hill that offered a panoramic view of the surrounding hills. Solar panels on the roof and a small wind turbine indicated that he was putting the renewable energy knowledge he had studied in college into practice. He greeted me on the porch before I even finished parking. Adrian was stronger than he was in college, with that healthy tan of someone who spends time outdoors. He was wearing a red flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up and faded jeans that looked decades old. "Derek! Man, you haven't changed at all," he lied shamelessly, wrapping me in a warm hug that lasted a few seconds longer than I expected. In reality, I knew I had changed a lot. The last 2 years of stressful work had left their marks. Some premature wrinkles around my eyes, gray hair at my temples, and a more slumped posture from long hours spent in front of a computer. But Adrian seemed genuinely happy to see me, and that warmed my chest in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. "You look great," I replied, and this time I wasn't lying. Adrian really seemed radiant, with that contagious energy he always had, but now tempered with a maturity that made him even more interesting. He helped me unload my backpack and led me inside the house. The interior was a harmonious mix of rustic and modern. Exposed wooden beams on the ceiling, a stone fireplace in the living room, a kitchen equipped with state-of-the-art appliances. Photographs on the walls showed Adrian in various natural landscapes. Mountain trails, deserted beaches, forests wrapped in mist. "This place is amazing," I said sincerely, taking in the view from the panoramic windows in the living room. Adrian smiled proudly. "It took me 3 years to find this land and another 2 to build the house exactly the way I wanted it. I work for a wind energy company. I supervise the installation and maintenance of turbines in an area that goes from here to the border with Santa Catarina. It's busy, but it allows me to live this way." He gestured to the property around us. "Here, I can have the peace I need after intense days climbing up and down 80-meter towers." He made coffee in a professional espresso machine while I admired the details of the decor. Everything in the house reflected Adrian's refined taste, but also his practical personality. Functional but beautiful furniture, decorative objects that clearly had a story behind them, and a bookshelf filled with technical books mixed with science fiction and biographies of adventurers. "So," he said, handing me a steaming cup of coffee, "tell me what's really going on. A 3-week trip with no destination doesn't seem like the style of the super-organized Derek I knew in college." I felt curiously comfortable opening up to him. Maybe it was the cozy atmosphere of the house, or the genuine way Adrian asked, but I ended up telling him much more than I intended. The failed project at work, the feeling of living on autopilot, the relationship with Marina that ended more from a lack of energy than any specific problem. Adrian listened to everything without interrupting, asking pointed questions that showed he was really paying attention. He didn't offer unsolicited advice or try to minimize my problems with self-help cliches. He just listened, and that alone was therapeutic. "You know, Derek," he said when I finished my story, "I think you've always been too hard on yourself. It was like that in college, too. Always worried about doing the right thing, about not disappointing anyone. But what about you? When do you allow yourself to do something just because you want to? The question caught me off guard. I was silent for a few seconds, because I realized I didn't know the last time I had done something purely out of my own desire, without considering the expectations of others. Welcome to the Club of the Lost in Transition, Adrian laughed, raising his coffee cup in an ironic toast. The difference is that I've already accepted that I don't need to have all the answers. Sometimes life is about trying new things and seeing what happens. We spent the rest of the afternoon on the porch, catching up. Adrian told me about his work on the wind turbines, the constant travel around the region, and the technical and logistical challenges of installing gigantic equipment in remote places. There was passion in his voice when he talked about renewable energy, about contributing to a more sustainable future. I shared stories from the last few years in Curitiba, but I realized that most of them revolved around work or problems I had created myself by trying to control aspects of life that were beyond my reach. My existence seemed small compared to Adrian's adventures. When the sun began to set, he lit the grill, and we prepared a simple but delicious dinner. Adrian moved around the kitchen with a natural efficiency, seasoning the meat, making a salad, and choosing the wine. There was something hypnotic about watching him work, an economy of movement that spoke of someone comfortable in their own skin. During dinner, the conversation flowed naturally between college memories and future plans. Adrian mentioned that he was considering expanding the property, maybe building some cabins to host tourists interested in authentic rural experiences. There are a lot of people in the big cities who need what you're looking for, he said, pouring me more wine. A place to slow down, to remember that there's life beyond emails and meetings. As the night progressed, I felt more relaxed than I had in months. Maybe it was the wine, or the clean country air, but mostly it was Adrian's company. He had the rare gift of making you feel interesting, of making your stories seem worthy of attention. After dinner, we settled into the living room in front of the fireplace. Adrian put on some low music, an eclectic playlist that mixed classic rock with ambient electronic music. The fire crackled softly, creating dancing shadows on the wooden walls. It was in that moment that I started to notice things I had ignored during the day. The way Adrian looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching, how he found excuses to sit closer on the couch, how his fingers brushed mine when he passed the beer bottle. Initially, I attributed these observations to the wine and nostalgia. After all, Adrian had always been an affectionate, tactile person. But there was something different in the air, a subtle tension I couldn't quite define. "Derek," Adrian said during a pause in the conversation, his voice more serious than before. "Can I ask you a personal question?" I nodded, curious about what was coming. "Are you happy? I mean, really happy with the life you've built?" The question completely caught me off guard. I was silent for a few seconds, processing not just the question, but the intensity with which Adrian asked it. There was something in his eyes, a depth that suggested my answer mattered more than simple curiosity between friends. "Honestly," I sighed, "I don't know what it means to be happy anymore. I've spent so long trying to build a life that looks right on paper that I've lost the connection with what really moves me." Adrian nodded slowly, as if my answer confirmed something he had already suspected. "You know what impressed me most about you in college?" he asked, leaning slightly in my direction. "It was that you always seemed to have everything under control, but once in a while, in rare moments, you would let a genuine passion for something slip out, like when you talked about that food redistribution project for needy communities, or when you organized that fundraiser for the flood victims." I vaguely remembered the projects he mentioned. They were initiatives that I had embraced with enthusiasm at the time, driven by a sense of purpose that seemed to have been lost somewhere along the way. "In those moments," Adrian continued, "your eyes had a different kind of sparkle. It was like you were finally being yourself, you know." His words resonated deeply. It had been so long since I had felt that inner spark that I didn't even remember what the feeling was like. "And now?" I asked. "What do you see now?" Adrian studied me for a long moment, as if he were deciding how much to reveal. "I see someone who's looking for an excuse to fall in love with life again," he finally answered. "And maybe with other things too." There was something about the way he said "other things" that made my heart race. Our gazes stayed connected for a few seconds that felt eternal, loaded with meanings I didn't have the courage to fully interpret. The moment was broken by my phone, which vibrated with a message. I looked at the screen automatically and saw a photo of Sarah, a woman I had met a few weeks before the trip. She was smiling in a selfie taken at work with the caption, "Miss you. Hope your adventure is helping you clear your mind." Reality hit me like a splash of cold water. Sarah. I had met Sarah at a networking event and we went out a few times before my trip. She was smart, beautiful, successful, exactly the kind of woman my family would approve of. We had exchanged messages sporadically during my journey, and she had made it clear that she was interested in deepening our relationship when I got back. "Sorry," I mumbled to Adrian, putting my phone away without responding to the message. Where were we? But the moment had passed. Adrian moved slightly away on the couch, and the atmosphere, charged with possibilities just minutes before, dissipated like smoke. We talked for another hour about general topics before deciding to go to sleep. Adrian showed me the guest room, simple but comfortable, with a double bed and a window that overlooked the moonlit hills. "The bathroom is the last one on the left down the hall," he informed me. "Towels are in the cabinet. If you need anything, my room is right there." I thanked him and said goodnight, but I stayed awake for a long time after I heard Adrian's bedroom door close. Lying in the darkness, replaying the night's conversation, trying to understand what had happened in those tense moments near the fireplace. There was something different about the way Adrian looked at me, in the intimacy of his questions, in the way the space between us seemed to carry electricity. Or was I imagining things because of the wine and nostalgia? I thought about Sarah and the expectation in her message. I thought about the organized life that was waiting for me back in Curitiba. I thought about Adrian, just a few feet away, probably also awake, maybe thinking about the same conversation that was occupying my mind. I fell asleep without answers, but with the feeling that something fundamental had changed on that first day at Adrian's house, even if I didn't know exactly what it was yet. Sunday arrived with a shy sun filtering through the guest room curtains. I woke up to the smell of fresh coffee and bacon being made in the kitchen, sounds that brought me a sense of coziness I hadn't experienced in a long time. Adrian was already up, making a hearty breakfast, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to host me in his home. "Sleep well?" he asked, serving me coffee in a handmade ceramic mug. He was wearing just a tank top that revealed more defined arms than I remembered from college and running shorts that showed off his tanned legs. "Better than I have in weeks," I answered honestly. It was true. There was something about the property's silence, broken only by the natural sounds of the morning, that gave me a restful sleep. After breakfast, Adrian suggested we fix a fence in the back of the property that had been damaged by a branch during the last storm. "It's nothing urgent," he said, "but since you're here and I have a skilled helper." We worked side by side all morning, Adrian teaching me how to use specific tools to fix the wooden fence. Our hands touched frequently when he showed me the correct technique to secure the boards, or when he passed me the tools. Each contact lasted a few seconds longer than necessary, and I noticed that neither of us made a move to pull away. The physical work revealed aspects of Adrian that I hadn't noticed the day before. The ease with which he handled the heavy tools, the confidence in his movements, the way small beads of sweat formed on his forehead as he nailed the boards into place. I caught myself watching him more than I should have, paying attention to details that a friend wouldn't normally notice. "You're looking at me again," Adrian said suddenly, stopping his hammering and turning to face me with a smile that had something provocative about it. I felt my face heat up. "I was just observing your technique," I lied awkwardly. "I've never been very good with manual labor." Adrian laughed, but his gaze remained fixed on mine for a few seconds that felt eternal. "Technique is important," he agreed, his voice carrying a double meaning that made me swallow hard. During lunch on the porch, the conversation flowed naturally, but I noticed layers of meaning in every sentence exchanged. Adrian talked about his future projects for the property, and I shared some reflections about my trip and the discoveries I was making about myself. "You know, Derek," he said in a moment of silence, idly playing with the edge of his juice glass, "I've always admired your loyalty. In college, you were one of those people everyone could count on." "Loyalty can be a prison sometimes," I replied without thinking, surprising myself with my own honesty. Adrian tilted his head, interested. "What do you mean?" "Sometimes I'm so worried about not disappointing people that I forget to check if I'm being loyal to myself," I explained, feeling that I was treading on dangerous ground but unable to stop. "And what would you discover if you were only loyal to yourself?" Adrian asked, his voice low and intense. The question hung in the air between us, charged with possibilities that neither of us was ready to fully verbalize. I looked away at the hills in the distance, trying to formulate an answer that wouldn't reveal too much about the whirlwind of thoughts and feelings Adrian was awakening in me. In the afternoon, we decided to relax in the pool area that Adrian had built on a high part of the property. The crystal-clear water reflected the blue sky, and the panoramic view of the mountains created a setting that was almost unreal in its perfection. We were silent for a while, just enjoying the sun and the tranquility of the place. Adrian was lying on a lounge chair beside me, eyes closed, his chest rising and falling in a hypnotic rhythm. I took the opportunity to observe him without embarrassment, noticing details that had escaped me during the busy morning. A small scar on his right shoulder, the defined line of his abdominal muscles, the way his lips curved slightly even at rest. "Can I ask you an indiscreet question?" Adrian said suddenly, without opening his eyes. My heart sped up. "You can. What really happened between you and Marina? The way you told it yesterday, it sounds like you broke up more out of convenience than incompatibility." The question caught me off guard. I took a few seconds to organize my thoughts before answering. "Marina was perfect on paper," I began slowly. "Smart, ambitious, beautiful, from a family that matched mine. Everyone expected it to work. But," Adrian insisted, now looking directly at me, "but there was no fire. There was no sense of urgency, of need. Everything was very civilized, very predictable. Making love with her felt more like an item on a conjugal to-do list than an expression of genuine desire." Adrian nodded slowly. "And did you ever wonder if the problem wasn't her, but the type of person you're attracted to?" The question hit a raw nerve. Of course I had asked myself that, especially during the last months of my relationship with Marina. There were nights when I lay beside her, watching her sleep, and wondered why I didn't feel that overwhelming passion I saw in movies or read about in books. "I have," I admitted, my voice coming out rougher than usual. "But I never came to any definite conclusion." Adrian got up from the lounge chair and walked to the edge of the pool, with his back to me. For a moment I thought he was going to dive in, but he just stood there, contemplating the water. "Sometimes," he said without turning around, "the answers we're looking for are closer than we think. We just need to have the courage to look." There was something about Adrian's posture, the way his shoulders were tense, that made me realize he wasn't just talking about me. I got up and walked to stand beside him at the edge of the pool. "Adrian," I began, not knowing exactly what I wanted to say. He turned to face me, and for the first time since I arrived, I saw vulnerability in his eyes. We were close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his sun-heated skin. "Derek," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I need to tell you something I've been holding back for a long time." My heart started beating so fast I was sure he could hear it. The air between us seemed thick, charged with unspoken electricity and possibilities. "Since college," Adrian continued, his eyes not leaving mine, I think about you differently, not just as a friend." The world seemed to stop. All the small interactions of the last 2 days, all the moments of tension and closeness, suddenly made perfect sense. Adrian wasn't just being a good host, he was subtly but deliberately courting me. "Adrian," I began, but he held up a hand, interrupting me. "Let me finish," he asked. "I know this might sound strange or inappropriate, but I can't pretend I don't feel this anymore. When you showed up here yesterday, it was like the universe was giving me a second chance to be honest about my feelings." I was paralyzed, processing his words. Part of me wanted to run away, to get back in the car and drive until I forgot this conversation. But a larger part, a part I had been trying to silence for years, wanted to get even closer to him. "I don't know what to say," I admitted honestly. "You don't have to say anything right now," Adrian replied, taking a step forward. The distance between our bodies shrank to just a few inches. "But I need you to know that everything I felt for you in college didn't disappear. In fact, it's only gotten stronger over time." I felt a wave of warmth spread through my body. Adrian reached out hesitantly, lightly touching my face. His skin was warm and slightly rough from working outdoors. I instinctively closed my eyes, allowing myself to fully feel that touch that I had secretly desired since I arrived. "Derek," he whispered my name like a prayer. When I opened my eyes, Adrian was even closer. I could feel his breath on my face, see the small lines of expression around his eyes, and notice how his pupils were dilated with desire. My rational mind screamed for me to back away, but my body seemed to have a will of its own. We moved inside the house without words, a magnetic tension pulling us. In the living room, Adrian led me to the couch, where we sat close enough for our thighs to touch. The contact sent waves of electricity through my body. "May I?" Adrian asked, his hand hovering near my face. I nodded, unable to speak. When his fingers finally touched my skin, it was as if an electrical circuit had closed. Adrian traced soft lines along my jaw, moving down my neck, each touch awakening sensations I didn't know existed. "How long have you known?" I asked, my voice coming out strangled. "That I like you? Since sophomore year of college? That I like men in general?" A lot longer, he answered with raw honesty. What about you? It was a question I had avoided asking myself for years. But there, with Adrian so close, with his masculine scent enveloping my senses, with my body reacting in ways I had never allowed, the answer seemed obvious. I think I always knew, but I never had the courage to admit it, I confessed. Adrian smiled, a sweet and understanding smile that made me feel accepted in a way I had never experienced. Slowly, he leaned in until our foreheads touched. We stayed like that for a few seconds, sharing the same air, feeling the anticipation grow between us like a storm about to explode. When we finally kissed, it was as if all the barriers I had built over the years had collapsed at once. The kiss started tender, exploratory, but quickly deepened when I realized that Adrian was trembling just as much as I was. His lips were softer than I had imagined, and the taste of him, a mix of coffee and something intrinsically masculine, made me want more. Our tongues met in a primitive and urgent dance, years of unresolved tension finally finding expression. Adrian's hands explored my back, pulling me closer until there was no space between our bodies. I could feel his heart beating against my chest, a wild rhythm that mirrored my own. My rational mind tried to intervene, reminding me of Sarah, of the complications, of the consequences, but my body was beyond the control of reason. Adrian guided me to lie down on the couch, positioning himself over me with a delicacy that contrasted with the urgency of our kisses. The weight of his body was comforting and exciting at the same time. When he kissed my neck, lightly nibbling the sensitive skin, a moan escaped my throat without me being able to control it. "Are you sure?" Adrian asked, pausing to look me in the eyes. In response, I pulled his head back to mine, kissing him with a hunger I didn't know I possessed. Adrian slowly removed my shirt, his fingers tracing paths of fire across my exposed skin. Each touch was deliberate, reverent, as if he were memorizing every inch of my body. When I returned the gesture, removing his shirt, we both paused for a moment to simply contemplate each other. The golden afternoon light created soft shadows on our intertwined torsos. Adrian was even more beautiful than I had imagined. Muscles defined by physical labor, tanned skin marked by small scars that told stories of outdoor adventures. "You're beautiful," he whispered, running his hands over my arms, my chest, my abdomen. No one had ever called me beautiful before. The women I had been with used words like handsome or charming, but there was something about the way Adrian said beautiful that made me feel truly desired for the first time in my life. Our bodies moved in a natural rhythm, as if we had done this 1,000 times before. I got lost in the intensity of the moment, in the heat Adrian awakened in me, in the sensations that ran through my body like electric currents. His kisses moved down my neck, my chest, while his hands explored territories no man had touched before. It was in that moment of total surrender, when I had finally stopped fighting against something that seemed as natural and inevitable as breathing, that my phone began to vibrate insistently on the coffee table. The sound brought me back to reality like a slap in the face. I looked at the screen and saw Sarah's name flashing, accompanied by a photo of her smiling that I had set as her contact picture. Her image, perfectly styled blonde hair, a professional but warm smile, representing everything my normal life meant, created a brutal contrast with my current situation. Adrian noticed the change immediately, pulling away and allowing me to sit up on the couch. The silence that followed was dense, filled only by our still irregular breaths and the insistent sound of the phone ringing. "Do you need to get that?" Adrian asked, his voice hoarse but understanding. I shook my head, but I knew the moment had been irreparably broken. Reality had invaded our bubble of intimacy like cold water in an overheated sauna. I picked up the phone and read the message Sarah had sent along with the missed call. "Hi, honey. I was thinking about you and decided to call. Hope you're having fun on your adventure. Can't wait to see you when you get back and hear all the stories. I love you." The word love hit me like a punch to the gut. Sarah had said she loved me, and I hadn't even responded appropriately. She trusted me, believed I was just on a self-discovery trip, when in reality I was discovering aspects of myself that put our budding relationship in question. "Derek," Adrian said softly, sitting next to me on the couch, now keeping a respectful distance. "It's okay." "No, it's not," I replied, running my hands through my hair. "I shouldn't have let things get this far." Adrian was silent for a long moment, and when I looked at him, I saw an expression of pain that broke my heart. "Do you regret it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. It was an impossible question to answer honestly without hurting someone. Either him, Sarah, or myself. Because the truth was that I didn't regret what had happened, but rather how the circumstances made everything so complicated. I don't regret you, I finally said. I regret the situation. Adrian nodded slowly, as if he perfectly understood the subtle but important difference between those two statements. We spent the rest of the afternoon in a closeness charged with unspoken things. During dinner, our gazes met frequently, loaded with memories of what had happened and the tension of what could still happen. The conversation flowed, but there were layers of meaning in every word exchanged. We talked about work, about future plans, about anything that would allow us to maintain an appearance of normalcy, but we both knew that something fundamental had changed between us. There was a new intimacy in our interaction, as if we had crossed an invisible line that could not be undone. At night, when Adrian showed me the guest room again, our good night lasted a few seconds longer than would be appropriate between friends. We stood at the bedroom door, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his body, but far enough to maintain the illusion that we still had control over the situation. "Thank you," I said, without specifying what exactly I was grateful for. "Thank you," Adrian replied, and by the look in his eyes, I knew he understood that my gratitude went far beyond hospitality. Lying in the guest bed, I listened to Adrian moving around in his room through the thin wall that separated us. Every sound, the creak of the bed when he lay down, the sound of water running when he brushed his teeth, the click of the light being turned off, reminded me of his physical closeness. I stayed awake for hours, my body still vibrating with the memories of his touches, my mind struggling to process everything that had happened. I had discovered something about myself that fundamentally changed how I saw myself, but there was also the reality of Sarah, who was waiting for me at home with expectations and plans that I no longer knew if I could fulfill. The house was silent, but I could feel Adrian's presence like a magnetic force on the other side of the wall. I wondered if he was also awake, reliving the same moments, feeling the same confusion of desire and guilt that was consuming me. I finally fell asleep near dawn, with the taste of Adrian still on my lips and the certainty that nothing in my life would be the same after that weekend. Monday arrived with a cloudy sky that perfectly mirrored my emotional state. I woke up to the sound of Adrian moving around the kitchen, making coffee as if it were a normal day, when we both knew that nothing would be normal between us anymore. During breakfast, the tension was almost palpable. Every casual gesture, Adrian passing me the sugar, our fingers briefly brushing, carried the weight of what had happened the day before. We talked about trivialities, the weather, the traffic I would face on the road, recommendations for places to visit. But beneath the polite words ran an undercurrent of unprocessed emotions. "I need to leave soon," I finally said, breaking a prolonged pause in the conversation. "I want to hit the road before traffic gets heavy." Adrian nodded, but I saw a shadow pass through his eyes. "Of course. I'll help you take your things to the car." The goodbye was a painful exercise in pretending normalcy. Adrian carried my backpack to the pickup, his movements more rigid than usual. We stood by the car for a few moments, both aware that we needed to say something, but not knowing exactly what. "Derek," Adrian began, then stopped, running a hand through his hair in a nervous gesture I wasn't used to seeing from him. "I know," I said softly. "I don't know how to process all of this either." He approached and wrapped me in a hug that lasted too long to be casual, but not long enough to express everything we wanted to communicate. I felt him inhale deeply, as if trying to memorize my scent, and I almost lost the courage to leave. "Will you keep in touch?" he asked when we separated, his hands still on my shoulders. "Of course," I replied, but we both knew that was a complex promise to keep. How do you resume a friendship after crossing lines that shouldn't have been crossed? I got in the car and started the engine, watching Adrian in the rearview mirror as I drove away on the dirt road. He stood in front of the house until I turned the corner and lost sight of him, an image that was burned into my memory like a photograph. During the first few hours on the road, I tried to focus on the landscape passing by the window, but my mind insisted on replaying every moment of the last 2 days. The taste of Adrian's lips, the texture of his skin, the sound of his breathing when we were close, all of it accompanied me like ghosts in the passenger seat. I stopped at an isolated gas station to refuel and grab something to eat. Sitting at a cheap plastic table, looking at truckers and travelers who were going about their journeys with seemingly clear purposes, I felt more lost than when I had left Curitiba weeks ago. I picked up my phone several times, typing messages to Adrian that I never got around to sending. What could I say? "Thanks for helping me discover something about myself that changed everything. Sorry for making our friendship complicated. I can't stop thinking about you." All the options seemed inadequate. During the drive back home, which stretched over 3 days of contemplative driving, I forced myself to think about Sarah and what she represented. Stability, security, a predictable future my family would approve of. All the things I thought I wanted before I discovered that there were other possibilities. Sarah had sent me a few messages during those days. Photos from work, plans for when I got back, small demonstrations of affection that made me feel like an imposter. I replied politely, but I felt like I was playing a role in a play I hadn't chosen to star in. 3 weeks after leaving Adrian's house, I was back in my routine in Curitiba. On the surface, nothing had changed. Same apartment, same job, with some tense meetings about my period of reflection, same gym, same restaurants, but I had fundamentally changed, and that made everything familiar feel strangely alien. Sarah and I resumed our regular dates. She was radiant, clearly happy to have me back, full of plans and expectations for our relationship. During our dinners, I smiled at the right moments, asked the appropriate questions about her work and her family, and acted like the attentive boyfriend she deserved. But on the inside, I felt like an actor misinterpreting his main role. Every time Sarah kissed me, I caught myself comparing it to Adrian's kisses. When she talked about our future plans, meeting my parents, maybe moving in together, the possibility of marriage in a few years, I nodded on autopilot while my mind wandered to a wooden house lost in the hills of Paraná. Adrian kept his word and sent me messages occasionally. Photos of the mountains during sunset, updates on his wind energy projects, and casual comments about the progress of the renovations on the property. Safe messages that any friend could send, but they arrived loaded with unspoken meanings that only we two understood. We never mentioned what happened that Sunday afternoon. It was as if we had made a tacit agreement to treat that moment as a parenthesis in reality, something beautiful but impossible that needed to remain locked away in a drawer of our memory. But some experiences mark you in irreversible ways. I had tasted something that made me question not only what I wanted, but who I really was. I had discovered a capacity to feel passion that I never knew I possessed, and now I had to decide what to do with that knowledge. One night, after a particularly pleasant dinner with Sarah where she had made subtle comments about taking the next step in our relationship, I was alone in my apartment looking at my phone. Adrian's number was there. All I had to do was press a button. A call that could change everything, or could change nothing. I thought about all the safe choices I had made in my life. All the times I chose the easiest path over what I truly desired. I thought about Marina, about Sarah, about all the wonderful women I had been with without ever feeling that urgency, that desperate need to be close that I had experienced with Adrian. I thought about the life I was building in Curitiba, safe, predictable, approved by everyone, and the alternative Adrian represented, uncertain, complicated, but authentic in a way I had never experienced. The truth was simple and terrifying. I had discovered something about myself that I could no longer ignore. I could choose to bury that discovery and continue living a life that looked right on paper, or I could have the courage to explore who I really was, even if it meant disappointing people who cared about me. I held my phone for almost an hour, Adrian's number on the screen, hesitating between the security of the known and the terrifying possibility of the unknown. I knew that any decision I made would have irreversible consequences. Maybe, I reflected as I finally put my phone away without making the call, the most important thing I learned that weekend wasn't about Adrian or my sexuality, but about the difference between living a life that seems right and living a life that is truly my own. What you're hearing here is just the beginning. The complete, unfiltered stories with all the details you can imagine are available now. Check out the link in the description right now. Subscribe to the channel and hit the like button for access to more stories like this. If this story made you question your own choices and connections, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. In the comments, tell me, have you ever been torn between the security of the familiar and the intensity of the unexpected? Next week there's another story that will stir your emotions. Don't miss it. And remember, sometimes the biggest discoveries about ourselves come in the most unexpected moments.